Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Patricia Parkinson. She's the co-founder of Decrypted, and Patricia and her team were responsible for the new Telos branding. And it's hi, Erica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So it's exciting to hear the story about how the new Telos branding came about. Well, we are glad to have you both here. Please take it from here.
Thanks for having us. Today, I wanted to bring Erica on as well. She's worked with us, Decrypted, on the Telos brand, as well as a number of different branding projects. And we've had a couple of conversations with the Telos community over the last month as we've rolled out the Telos brand about some of the decisions that went into the new design and the Indigo Circle. And we feel like we've given a lot of airtime. And today we want to focus a little bit more on this new concept of creating a decentralized brand. I've been branding for about 15 years, and this was a totally new concept for me when we started working with Telos, and it's something that's really exciting. And there isn't really a known blueprint on how to do this. So Eric and I kind of want to just like jam out loud on the considerations that came to play and the things that we're learning along the way. And we think that brands like this are going to become more and more relevant in the blockchain space and within Telos. Yeah, anything to add on that, Erica?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really looking at is Telos has an existing community. And so how do we create a brand that allows people who have put a lot of time and energy into contributing to the network to paint on a canvas? And so the idea of making a brand that at one time stands for something, and then on the other hand also allows for a lot of individual contribution and iteration was something that we thought heavily about, and that really informed the way that we approached this project.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, like let's start by defining what a decentralized brand actually is. In a traditional way, a brand is owned by an organization, and the majority of the brand materials are disseminated out by them, and the brand is controlled and upheld by them in terms of its integrity. And it's only in kind of fan fiction or fandom that we find that people build on brand materials in this way. So with things like music or films or any kind of fandom, you'd see people creating more potentially than the actual brand owners themselves. But with something like Telos and being commissioned by the Telos Foundation, we were aware right off the bat that the Telos Foundation does not own the Telos brand, nor can they tell the community what to go do and use. So we needed to approach it with the lens of painting the picture of a vision and planting a seed that we hoped the community would adopt, but didn't necessarily assume that the community would adopt.
And at least, when I was brought on to think about Telos, looking at the word Telos itself became sort of a lighthouse for us, in that Telos as a term stands for purpose. And so, in terms of thinking about how would we allow the brand to stand for something, it became very clear to us that there was a container that we were building for a lot of different people who had a lot of different purposes to unite together and to find each other. And so in thinking about what would it actually look like to turn this into something that would be usable, we really started to think about, what would enable people to define and add their own layer of what their purpose is, so that the Telos brand, rather than defining and promoting a single purpose, actually becomes a platform to enable many different groups with different purposes to enact whatever action they want to take to achieve their outcomes.
Yeah, and just in terms of that, we definitely anchored into the concept of what Telos was and the intrinsic things that we felt weren't going to change, but then started evaluating what elements of the brand were up for negotiation and up for reinterpretation. And there was an interesting consideration of like at what level and at what point did we bring the community in to have a voice in that. So there were things like Telos standing for purpose that we felt everybody was going to be in agreement on, and some things that we felt were up for discussion, like the use of the acorn logo. And one of the challenging decisions in doing the brand, along with doing any brand, is like design by committee. We don't want to have too many voices too early in the process, because that will limit creativity and the direction that we're most serving like an outcome here, which is to grow the network. So we wanted to pursue the creation of the brand to a point where the vision was coherent, and strategically engage voices along the way to help make sure that we were in alignment with not just how we saw the network, but how everyone within the network saw it as well, while doing this balancing act of realizing that in Telos' true potential, its largest audience doesn't even know of it yet.
Patricia, I'm really curious because I know you've done a lot of work. We've worked together on Everpedia, among other projects, where the brand does have a lot. It's a very all-encompassing sort of tableau of topics, and so there's a lot of kind of flexibility in terms of what that brand could stand for. I'm really interested just to hear your thoughts compared to other projects you've worked on. What were the considerations that made this so different than a lot of the other things you've done?
Yeah, I actually think back to some early conversations we had with Justin. And before we started thinking of any of the attributes of the brand, it was, how can a brand be created that is, that can be like co-owned and evolved in collaboration with the community. And not to say that we've gone this far yet, but the intentions that we talked about with the Telos Foundation and with Justin was creating a platform where people felt shared ownership of the brand. They had access to the assets, they could have conversations about it. And that's something that I envision would be very beneficial for Telos in the future, is like almost like a resource space. So in not to say that this would be necessarily created, but what if you had DAC that managed a brand and people could raise their hands and be determined as custodians and have some trust established in them. So there was something around the container of where the brand materials were disseminated and how people had ability to contribute and manage those materials. What was also new with Telos was when we started looking at like the values that Telos stood for. There are some things that we can assume from the blockchain space in general, and a lot of like-mindedness here. But there was this feeling that as the network evolves, the values of Telos would evolve. So rather than, for example, creating a manifesto with 3 different values, what if we, this was ideating, but what in future if we created a space where people could propose a value that they held and other people in the community upvote it, but that be like ever-changing and a living thing? That was an interesting concept. That the brand stood for could shift over time, but have the level of transparency and accessibility to its community. Otherwise, just to kind of like think back on what was really unique about Telos, I think that similar to Everpedia, we were faced with this like dichotomy between like a challenge and opportunity of how do you create a brand for potentially everybody. With Everpedia, we talk about it being the encyclopedia for everyone, and we came across this concept of it being a container brand. So the brand not speaking loudest of all, but being a container for those that want to create within it. So in the case of Everpedia, it would be the article content that spoke loudest, and Everpedia is kind of like an accent behind it. And we were looking at ways that Telos could do that as well, which inevitably became the circle as a blank canvas. And something that we felt all different types of stakeholders and audiences in Telos would hopefully share as a similar value, which was humanity's Telos, or the collective flourishing of humanity. We didn't feel a lot of people that joined the network would have any kind of qualms with that. And go ahead, Erica. Yeah.
One of the things that I'm really thinking about is, a lot of people conceive of branding as being something that, you like send off the brand to the consultants and they bring it back to you and that's it, and you just act upon it. And I'm hearing kind of implicitly within the way that you're describing it, and I know from our own internal conversations that a lot of our emphasis was upon giving people a starting point rather than an end-all be-all. And so I think that's a really interesting nuance between at least this project and other branding projects that I've been involved in. And I'm curious to hear more from you about how you conceive of brand as starting point or recommendation or sort of like a place to edit from for a community.
Yeah, that's I said early on that the concept of decentralized brand is something that's exciting and new. And I think that that's actually a lesson that we learned in this process is we viewed it as this starting point, this seed. And at the point that like we had engaged some of the community behind the scenes along the whole process in a very kind of strategic way. But when the point that we released it to the community, our intention was to go, hey, this is what we've been working on. This is what we're thinking. What do you think? And to bring the community into that dialogue to continue evolving the brand alongside us. And I think that it was my perception is that it was perceived like, here's the brand, it's done and finished, go and use it now. And that's something I think in terms of languaging and framing that we've taken on board in doing decentralized brands in the future, and that we're going to continue to emphasize with Telos is that, there are a lot of very talented, insightful, passionate people in this community who have insights that we hadn't even thought of in the process. So going back to your question, Erica, I think it was around how do we have this brand as kind of the start jumping off point. I think it's important to open a dialogue and pose questions and to not be leading in that sense, but to explain our rationale as much as possible and try to bring people along the journey of our thinking with us as much as we can. And I just talked to Justin about this last night, so I'm going to tease it a little bit. But one of the things that we are most excited about with the brand is that the brand isn't really, the logo is fantastic and the logo is a logo, but a brand is not a logo. And we thought that the biggest opportunity here is actually around messaging and movement building. And I'm going to throw to you in a moment, Erica, to speak more about this. But we've been realizing for a long time that this word blockchain is very heavy and it can be alienating to some and almost like a closed door when you raise it. But a lot of us share similar values around why we're working in blockchain and what if we could put different language to it. And we started thinking of language that we could use with Telos and have landed on the concept of telocracy, which we find really interesting. And Erica, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. One of the things, as I said, we were very motivated by this word Telos in a world where the brand could really stand for a million different people's ideas and perspectives and opinions and directions that it could go. We didn't have a ton of anchors, but that word Telos, meaning purpose, was a really strong anchor for us in terms of thinking through what do we stand for? What does this brand stand for that is different than other brands and that is something that actually would be meaningful in terms of impact on the world. And we started to think about, what were other movements that we respected that took a philosophy of how to organize people and helped it spread. And so, for instance, one of the things that has really influenced Patricia and I and the team that we work with is the concept of holacracy and the idea of having new ways to distribute the way that we collaborate and the way that we make decisions within a team who are actually trying to accomplish something meaningful. And we saw a really close parallel with Telos in that way, in that for at least in the way that I perceive it, Telos really relates to the power of what can happen when people become united around a shared purpose. And so in terms of an organizational structure and in terms of helping people get things done and in terms of, people feeling like they're part of something. At least I see there being a huge potential for this shared purpose to be a focal point for one, gathering people, two, helping them plan and coordinate around what they'd like to do to accomplish their shared purpose, and then three, actually execute upon it. And so that was something that we started to really look deeply at, is what would it take to help people actually unite around a shared purpose. And so in my estimation, the word telocracy can really potentially become a powerful stand-in for this concept that when people are united around a shared purpose, they are more effective in achieving their aims, and they are more effective in terms of creating ripple effects in the world. And so it's something that we are looking into ways to present and to, basically memify within the Telos community. And that's something that we are actively in conversation around. And I know that you and I would both love to invite people to share what their thoughts are around the idea of sort of creating a broader movement from this sprout of this word Telos, and helping to coordinate people around what would purpose-driven movement building do for the world? What would that look like? And how could Telos be a guiding light for people who are inspired by that philosophy?
Yeah, just making sure my audio is still working, because I plug in my, okay, cool. Yeah, I think that it's pretty remarkable that there is so little already online and on the concept of telocracy. Like, similar to the logo, it feels like a blank canvas mostly, which I think is great from a thought leadership perspective and from a social perspective, from a conversational point perspective. And one of the things that I'm most interested in with the community as we kind of bridge this is starting to ask people what their Telos is. And if people would sum it up as a definitive statement, as a list of different things, and that's looking at this as an exploratory exercise, that's one of the things that excites me the most, and being able to build off of it that way. And I think that that's a much easier entry point with people, where, for example, Erica and I had attended a blockchain conference last year and hosted a sidebar session on around a thesis that in blockchain, we talk way too often on the how and tend to bury people, and not enough on the why. And in some of my experiences in talking with blockchain groups and hosting meetup organizations, that's what's really, I feel, ignited people and brought people and lit them up the most, is when we start talking about like practical use cases and social applications that was relevant to them. And when we were talking about how can we introduce the concept of blockchain or introduce these things that we're passionate about to people in our lives, that why being a very strong entry point. So for example, when you're speaking with someone, finding out what they're passionate about, and then finding examples in blockchain that apply over to it, or framing it through their lens in that way. And I imagine telocracy can be a bridge similar to that. What do you think, Erica?
I like what you're saying, because I think, one of the things that we've seen in terms of thinking through the Telos brand is that there is definitely a bridge that needs to be built between the people who are the fibers that are building Telos right now. The people who are the passionate, committed supporters, who are putting in the hours, who are putting in the energy. Those of us who are here on this, conference right now are the people who are sort of the bleeding edge of the Telos movement. And it doesn't end with us. We are the beginning of this tidal wave. And so as we are looking toward what's coming next, I know at least what makes you and I really passionate, and what's something that I've heard from most of the people in the blockchain space who have encountered over the years, is that we are all looking toward a future where people who don't necessarily identify as crypto enthusiasts or blockchain people actually understand that we're just building tools to make a new world where power and value are treated differently. and where contribution is encouraged. And there's a lot of different philosophies that are nested within the thing that we're building here. And so, it's right now, in terms of where the brand stands, to me, we have an opportunity as the passionate people, as the early adopters, to make something that is super accessible to the people who do not yet feel part of the in-group or part of this little club that we're in. And so in terms of, the goals of what all of our branding efforts we're driving toward and are going to be driving toward in the future, we're very much keeping people in mind who do not yet feel passionate or bought into the blockchain world and the crypto world, but who are enlivened by something that matters to them. Whatever that is, we want them to be calling it their Telos. We want them to be recognizing that they have something within them that is a passion that's driving them, and that there's other people out there who share that passion, and that with a network like Telos, they can find those people, they can collaborate, and they can birth actual real change by working together. To me, that's the dream of Telos. That's the brand that we want to create. And that's the thesis of what makes Telocracy really special, is that if we are able to distill what makes the people who are here right now really passionate about Telos and spread that, then that's going to be a very powerful mechanism for helping create ripple effects far beyond what any one of us individuals can do on our own.
I'm so glad Erica is on this live stream to speak so eloquently when I'm sitting here at 7 a.m. and just in general to be working on the Telos project. And a lot of the branding language, majority of the branding language that you've seen come out has been from Erica's, eloquence that you're witnessing right now. So I'm not just glad to be collaborating with you on this, Erica, but I just want to call you out for being able to articulate something so abstract in the way that you have and kind of put our finger on this, because I think a lot of us are dancing around these feelings, but it's sometimes hard to really identify and to figure out a strategy for achieving what you're suggesting. And I think a lot of times we can get really wrapped up and excited about the technology at play and kind of lose sight of that bigger picture and how we can actually spread this into a much wider movement.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you something, Patricia. I know one of the quotes that I've seen you say in some of the articles that came out, and in thinking about the Telos brand, is that good brands attract and repel. And, part of the challenge in being a branding person who's doing this work is that there's necessarily going to be people who don't necessarily feel in touch with whatever brand you're putting out there. And so obviously our goal is to appeal to the most number of people as possible and bring them into the Telos movement, while also understanding that unless there are some people who are repelled, we're maybe not veering hard enough towards standing for something. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about how that's played out, how that sort of those two sides have played out in your mind in terms of thinking through the Telos brand.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been involved with a branding project that had as much vocal community participation on both sides previously. It's been very eye-opening and motivating to see people care so much, and it makes me feel like we're doing something meaningful and creating something that's standard for something. And yeah, there was enormous amount of support in terms of people creating creative materials and jamming and remixing off of the idea immediately. And also a lot of very vocal people that either didn't feel part of the process early on or thought that the brand represented a lack of forethought and thinking and its simplicity. And that was confronting to us. But when we checked in with ourselves, the first thing that came to mind is, wait, people are caring enough to have conversations about this. That's good. That's great in itself. And two, this concept of you can't please everyone / change takes time, and starting to become comfortable with that. And that was evident to us even with the people that we were engaging very early on, like Justin and CJ and Doug. the brand didn't land with them immediately as a hell yes. It took some time to kind of sink in, but our perceptions were when it did, it really landed strongly, and that's what mattered the most. So I think that just in general with branding, and just to underline in terms of our experience here, I see the branding exercise as a success in that way, and having it generate so much participation being indicative of us creating something that's very meaningful. And I think it's important to also realize that with a decentralized brand like this, there isn't going to be one centralized, cohesive form of it, but it's going to splinter into being modular. And we're already seeing that with people, for example, continue to accept the acorn, to have their interpretations of the brand, and that is totally okay. At the end of the day, the visuals are kind of an afterthought in terms of the branding, but what we really wanted to make sure we seeded was a focus on why people cared about Telos as a network and what we could build upon to spread this much more widely, which I think is around the concept of being purpose-driven, which I don't think anyone I've come across actually has been pushing against, because that's so intrinsic to the brand.
And that's really, that to me speaks to the fact that we're actually expecting splinters. We're actually expecting that people will take this and run with it in a completely different direction, because we're not dictating this is your purpose, this is how your purpose should be executed through the platform. It's a platform, it's a network for a reason, because the idea is to provide fertile ground for people who care very much about something to build upon it. And so the idea that people would take a starting point or a kernel and then design it into something completely different that you and I had never thought of is actually the sort of landscape that we're attempting to build. That's a proof of success in a lot of ways, if it morphs beyond anything recognizable to you and I.
Yeah, well said. This might be a good time to just open up to some Q&A. I just see CJ jumped in as well, but I'm happy to answer any questions and just start discussing some of these considerations with people.
Well, thank you for sharing that, both Patricia and Erica. I like the logo myself and the branding. It's very elegant, and I'm sure a lot of work has been put into this. So Patricia, tell us about yourself. You are, and about your company. You are from, you both of you are founders of Decrypt, right? And tell us about what you do and how you came into Telos.
Yeah, so I have been working loosely in the blockchain space since about 2015, 2016. It wasn't until 2017, 2018 with Steam that I actually started working much more closely in the blockchain space. And since about last year, I've been working with the Decrypted team. We started actually as Chestnut, which was a smart account platform that we pitched at the EOS hackathons and had some success with. And that's where I first met my co-founders, Dan and Danielle. And Danielle previously had co-founded Blockchain Babes with me, which was an organization working with introducing women into the blockchain space. And we all met in Bali around that time, along with Brandon, who had also become a co-founder, and Erica in the mix of this. We all find ourselves as kind of nomad world travelers of sorts. And Telos actually got onto our radar first with Chestnut. I think we were at the South Africa hackathon for EOS and did a press release with Telos, making it really clear that our product at the time, Chestnut, was intended to be blockchain agnostic, and that we would be supporting Telos at one point, which is still our hope with the project. So we've known Justin for a while and been very aligned with Telos's positioning. So after working on Everpedia for the last year, which we continue to do, but in parallel to that, when Telos approached us to help reposition them, we were incredibly excited about the alignment between what we want to be seeding in the blockchain space in general, and the conversations we want to be having, and the platform that Telos provided to be able to do that in alignment between it. And Erica, maybe you want to build on that?
Yeah, and Patricia and I were both doing branding work in the blockchain space, and there aren't many of us. And so when we came across each other, it was a moment of like, okay, maybe we have a lot of alignment on what we're doing, and kind of off to the races, started collaborating on a few projects. And she was kind enough to bring me into a few of the things that she was working on. We had experimented with some sort of decentralized agency models ourselves a couple years ago. Eventually, she founded Decrypted, and I come in and support where I can with a lot of the projects. I come from a brand messaging background, and so my efforts are generally to put language to these abstract concepts. And, my specialty is really working on projects that need to explain a paradigm shift before people can even understand what they do. And so Telos, kind of bridges that gap in a lot of ways, because I think, if explained as a purpose-oriented platform, I think a lot of people can understand what that is. If explained as a blockchain, I think there's still the vast majority of people that may not be super inspired. And so I saw this as a really huge opportunity to take something that, is deep in the blockchain space and make it really accessible to a lot of people who may not yet self-identify as so-called blockchain people.
And I'd love to jump in and share a quick story that Eric has heard me share lots of times before, but was an enormous lesson for me. And I think some of us in this space could probably keep it a little bit more at the forefront of mind. But when I first came across Erica, like she said, she positioned herself exactly as I did, as a blockchain brander. And there wasn't a lot of us doing it. And my initial instincts were, okay, she's competition. There's not a lot of work out there. And we were in the same social circles, but that still didn't create a point of uniting until she actually reached out to introduce herself. And as soon as we connected, we realized that we weren't actually competing against each other. Our skills were very complementary. Whereas Erica approached things more with the messaging and psychology point of view, with a lens to all the other considerations in branding. My strengths are very different to hers, in sense of more of the vision building and the visual nature of a brand. So we became very natural partners in that sense. And it's a lesson that's really stuck with me around this theme of cooperation, or just a general cooperation in the industry, that I think we can be doing more of. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about a platform like Telos. Someone on our team once pointed this example to me about how many organizations in the world are working towards the same purpose by competing for resources. What happens if they can identify each other and work together towards those goals, rather than being completely isolated in the world and fighting over very limited resources in their goals? And I'm really excited for Telos potentially be a platform to enable that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for both of you for taking the time to be part of this event. And we are very glad that you worked on Telos. We are very happy with the branding, and thank you very much.